In this video, I'll basically be talking about how Marx and Hegel are related. Talking about how Marx was influenced by Hegel, and how the Hegel's dialectic, that kind of thought process and that way of looking at the world, move on to Marx. And so, basically, when I talk about Marx, I'm kind of talking about how Marx thought about how the world was in this kind of way of thought of as this kind of dialectical process. I will explain that in a bit here. But Marx, I guess I'm trying to think about how Marx kind of thought about how we have feudalism and capitalism and primitive. We have primitive communism, and then feudalism, and then capitalism, and then basically we have revolutions which overthrow things, and that's because of we have the bourgeois and the proletarian. The proletarian is the one who does the work and does the labor and gets paid a minimum wage for it, just so he can sustain himself and his family, while the bourgeois own all the modes of production, all of the resources, and they own everything, and they basically, whatever surplus or profit comes from what the proletarians do, the bourgeois get, and the bourgeois are the rich ones who own everything. So in a way, Marx talked about a estrangement or a alienation, to where how the proletarian is basically being exploited, and that he's doing the work and he's producing goods, and those are basically being owned by the bourgeois, and the bourgeois are getting the surplus profit from it. And so in a way, the labor and the work he's doing is a part of him, and that's basically being owned by the bourgeois. So a part of himself is being owned by somebody else, and in that way he's being alienated from himself. So that's a very, I guess, kind of not so good of a explanation of Marx and his estrangement thing, but I do have a video or two which actually does go more into Marx, which I did a while back, but it's in my social and political philosophy playlist. So you can go there for a much better explanation of it. So Hegel had a couple works that are pretty important to read in Hegel. Is the phenomenology of spirit, and also the science of logic. Hegel talked about a universal man or universal spirit, and he was a different kind of idealist from the people like Schopenhauer or Kant or Fichte, and he kind of thought about this universal or spirit, this universal spirit, to where we kind of are living in this ideal world. That's kind of what he was kind of moving toward. He had a philosophy which was very abstract and very metaphysical. Let me find the page here. All that. It was very abstract and very metaphysical. His Science of Logic was basically a big book, two-volume book about his metaphysics. Is very abstract. His very abstract metaphysics of the absolute. So he's very abstract, very philosophical, and very theoretical. Talking about this ideal world or ideal spirit of man, and this ideal spirit of man is what causes or contributes to the development of society and the world. This universal spirit, really. So society is fixed toward a certain end, but what the whole dialectical thing is about change, contradiction, and conflict. Because we have a thesis, first off, which something is, or somebody is saying something, well, we should do this, or things are like this. Then we have an antithesis, which is a contradictory or conflicting statement to the thesis. Then we have a synthesis or a sublation, or in German a Aufhebung, which is a bit of a compromise or an amalgamation of the thesis or the thesis and the antithesis. So we have this conflict and change and contradiction, which leads to a certain progress or a certain fixed end. So in a way, conflict and change and contradiction leads to a certain progress in society. And this is all because of this universal spirit, or man, or mind. And that's basically what it is. It's this whole thing, and it also has to do with history, talking about how history and causal processes are the cause for the way things are, and talking about this whole history of how things have led up to the way they are through these dialectics. So Marx, what did Marx take from all this? Now, Feuerbach, which I have talked about in a different video, which I just made, talked about how we had this illusory God that man makes up for himself and kind of comes after to meet his own needs of human nature, and how that God that we set up for ourselves alienates ourselves from ourselves. Feuerbach also did talk about how this idea of a universal spirit or mind, in a way, does also alienate man from himself. However, Hegel was all for this whole idealistic, abstract, universal mind. So what did Marx take from this? Marx was a historical materialist who didn't care for Hegel's abstract, theoretical, philosophical, universal spirit stuff. He didn't care about the absolute or any of that abstract stuff, or about the absolute and such. Marx cared about this dialectical process of change and conflict and contradiction. He cared about that whole process, that whole framework of how society, and the whole framework of history as to how society gets from one point towards another in progress, really. So Marx, he talked about different stages of a economy in a society, and as to how they change based upon the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis in this dialectical process. And we kind of had this. He also discussed the concept of a revolution, to where repression and oppression and exploitation of people leads to the whole government, or the whole framework or ideology even gets overthrown, or to where the people who are being exploited are basically turning the whole thing around, and that's how we get to a certain socialist and then finally a full communist thing. So that's how Marx and Hegel relate. Marx liked the whole dialectical thing, the whole dialectics of change in history, and that's the whole thing. So, so if you think I've messed something up or left something out, please comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you need help with something or have a question, I don't normally talk about Hegel because I've been taught him a lot, but I'm not that confident with Hegel. I'm starting to be more though. Hegel isn't my best my best forte in philosophy though. But still, go ahead and ask, and I'll do my best. I might go ahead and direct you to another YouTuber who does philosophy. His name is Chad African. He does have a really nice understanding of Hegel, way better than me. So, thank you.